I do charge my car at home with solar as well, which keeps the cost down. So let's talk about some EV myths and misconceptions. So first and foremost, this is one of my favorite ones. I think this might have been maybe created by Josh at some point. I heard them EVs catch fire. I've heard that several hundred times over the last 8 years or so. And this is from a concerned citizen voicing concerns on Facebook, which is where everybody airs their dirty laundry, including myself. But I'm here to tell you that the electric vehicles aren't as dangerous as they're made out to be in a lot of these rumors. So according to information compiled by the NTSB, gasoline is a lot more combustible, obviously. So if you combine gasoline cars with hybrids, also require gasoline, you're looking at over 215,000 fires as compared to just a vehicle that is straight electric with no gasoline drivetrain in it. And also, according to a recent report from the National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA, vehicle fires accounted for only 15% of the 1.4 million fires that took place in the US in 2020. And of those fires, only 0.02% of those were electric. So a very, very small portion of those vehicles were electric that caused those fires. So you can see it. And our Jersey Shore guy says you're about 61 times more likely to experience a fire in a gas vehicle than in an electric. And there's a bunch of agencies that compile this information worldwide based on the amount of electric vehicle fires that have taken place as of July 22. So this is obviously dated, this chart, but you can see that based on certain model years, there were some that were more prone to others. But the good news is that we've really advanced as far as the battery chemistry goes over the last couple of years. And the new battery chemistry in these vehicles is far, far less likely to develop thermal runaway and as a result cause a fire. What is starting to be the leading cause of fires as far as in houses and things like that when it comes to electronics? It's things like scooters, e-bikes, lots of personal electronics that do not make the minimum standard under the Underwriters Laboratory certification. So if you are looking at an e-bike, make sure that it's got that Underwriter certification logo or label. And the good news is that Western Cycle, who's here today selling e-bikes, they only sell e-bikes that have that fire rating and that certification. Okay, so that's obviously super important. Also, a huge misconception is just generally electric vehicles and the winter, right? A lot of people say, well, they just don't mix. They're just not going to work. Well, I'm actually here to say that an electric vehicle is actually one of the best vehicles that you can drive in the winter. And why is that? Well, because the battery management system keeps the battery warm, even when the car isn't plugged in. So the battery will use its own means or its own electricity to keep the battery warm. In a lot of circumstances, I'll be plugged in at work overnight, not plugged in at work overnight. It'll be extremely cold, and I'll come back out to my car the next morning, and I'll only be missing maybe 2 or 3% of my battery pack that's been diminished just by the car keeping the battery warm on its own. Also, because there's no oil to keep warm or parts to move at minus 40 Celsius, an electric vehicle will start every single time. Okay, it doesn't require a whole bunch of warm fluids and gears and pistons moving around in order to sustain combustion to start the vehicle. An electric basically just has an on switch, and you push the on switch at minus 40 and you drive away. Also, what's nice is an electric vehicle can warm up the cabin much faster than gas because it does not require all that heat to warm up the engine block, which will then be pushed through the vents of the vehicle itself in the cabin. EVs are instant heat. Just think of a hairdryer, basically. As soon as you flip on a hairdryer, you have heat, right? And an electric vehicle is no different than that as far as heat. Excellent traction and equal weight distribution and phenomenal traction control systems. So I drive a Tesla Model 3. It calculates traction about 1,000 times a second between the front axle and the back axle. That is far, far more often than any internal combustion vehicle that's got, let's say, a mechanically driven all-wheel drive system, right? So these cars are smart. They know what's going on. They're constantly looking for traction and any little slips here and there. Also, with winter fuel blends, denser air and headwinds, people tend to forget that gasoline cars also lose driving range in the winter, right? So you can lose up to 30% of your driving range in the winter driving gas or diesel, which, of course, not a lot of people talk about. An EV can lose up to 40 to 50% driving range, however, but it's only because the EV has a smaller tank. Okay, so on an average EV, they have basically the equivalent of 6 liters of gasoline in the battery pack. If you wanted to convert the kilowatt hours of battery pack potential to liters of fuel, it basically works out to 6 liters. So then the $1 million question is, I guess, how far will your gasoline vehicle go on 6 liters of fuel in the winter? Right? I'm guessing it's not going to drive that far. So when you compare that 6 liters of fuel in a gas car compared to 6 liters of fuel in an EV, the EV is going to go 3 to 4 times further for sure. This is another great one. So this was a meme that was shared by some members of parliament in Ottawa. And basically they're doing a drive-by smear campaign on EVs and why they're a terrible winter car, trying to spread misinformation from a government level, which I always appreciate. But anyway, this was shared by an MP in Parliament, and basically said, so you want to be here in an electric car, trying desperately to keep warm as your battery dwindles away. So the joke's on this guy, because an EV actually can last a very long time on the side of a road, let's say in a blizzard. And that's because the heating systems in these vehicles, number one, are so efficient. Number two, you're basically taking 3 to 4 days of your home power supply with you in a battery pack. So an average battery size in most vehicles is about 60 kilowatt hours in an electric. And with an electric heater, you initially start out about 6 kilowatts peak power, and then it switches over to 2 kilowatts as it begins to warm up the cabin. So even if you only had half your battery pack left, you're running your heater at 2,000 watts, you still have over 15 hours of heat on the side of the highway, and that doesn't include your heated seats and steering wheel, which are even more efficient than that 2,000 watts. So you could stay on the side of a highway for a long, long time driving an EV versus a gas car, which would burn through its fuel much, much quicker. So this isn't the gotcha that a lot of people seem to think so, especially politicians who like to spread misinformation. One thing I will mention is EVs, they are very similar to human beings. They like to be kept on a battery pack level, the same temperature as a human. So basically 72 degrees Fahrenheit or room temperature, that's essentially the same as what a battery pack likes. Now, when we start to get too hot, right, our productivity goes down. But if we get cold, our productivity goes down as well. And the EV is no different. And hence the reason why it starts to get cold, that's when an EV starts to develop some range loss, right? So see, as we start to go down, as we start to lose some temperature here, we're starting to get colder and colder, you can see that our driving range starts to drop as well. And so the car knows about this. The car does its best to keep that heat. And how does it do that? Well, it's actually got a built-in battery management system that thermally regulates the battery. So it's got air conditioning loops built in that prevents the battery from getting too hot. And then it's got heating loops that are built in to keep the battery from getting too cold. And both of those things prevent premature degradation over the long term. But they also keep the battery pack at a warm enough level in order for it to drive long distance, but also for it to charge fast at a fast charger on the highway. So these cars are a lot more advanced than maybe a lot of people think, and the batteries don't degrade in the way that people think. A lot of people say, oh, those EV batteries are only going to last 2 years in most of those cars, right? That could not be further from the truth. Tyler Krause was just presenting up here a little while ago, and there's vehicles over in Europe where a lot of the first EVs began, and there's some cars over there with literally over 1 million miles on the original battery, which is insane. When's the last time you saw a 1 million mile gasoline motor? There's a couple Toyotas probably kicking around, because Toyotas are good cars, but there's not very many that can pull that off. Here's another big myth and misconception. Electric vehicles are just too expensive to own. I'll just do it. So then home electricity typically costs less than 10% of gas, and there's minimal maintenance. Most people, if you live in the city of Regina and you're driving electric, typically it's about $50 to $60 a month extra on your power bill. So that's really cheap. Who's filling their tank of gas in their gasoline car today for 50 or 60 bucks? That's it. I'm allowed to slander. So yeah, and I mean the economics are even better now that gasoline is $2 a liter, right? So this is an old chart from a few years ago, 2023, charging an EV versus filling up a gas-powered car. So once again, the economics for the EV are much, much better. Okay. I did not plan this as part of my presentation, but everybody who's here can come up to the front row and hang out. Hey. So yeah, basically electricity in Saskatchewan right now is 15 to 16 cents a kilowatt hour. On average, people are filling their EV for about $50 a month. Right? Gasoline rates are obviously much, much higher than that and are completely out of our personal control. The good news with electricity is that it is regulated. Electricity rates don't change very often. Plus, I can generate my own electricity if I wanted to at my house, which is pretty cool to be able to do that. Also, another thing is, as we've evolved, right, gasoline motors, diesel motors, they've gotten more and more complicated as the years go on. And why is that? Well, they're trying to become more economical. And I feel like we've reached the point where gas motors have now gotten so advanced and so complicated with so many different things in computers, and I mean, EVs have computers in them too, obviously. But there's so many moving parts now in internal combustion engines that the cost of maintenance and the complexity makes them much, much more complicated, difficult, and expensive to own. So we compare that then to an EV, which has basically 15 to 20 moving parts in it, depending on the model. So obviously less moving parts is good, less maintenance, less things to break, so on and so forth. And just out of personal experience, I've got approximately 150,000 kilometers on my electric. Basically, I rotate my tires seasonally, I change the cabin filters, and I fill with washer fluid. That's basically it. That's all I've had to do in 8 years on my car, and I've estimated that I've saved probably pretty close to $30,000 on fuel. So then there's the big question about the impact and emissions. A lot of people say, well, you got a coal-powered car there, son. That's nothing but a coal mobile. So this is actually data that was taken real time from the Saskatchewan Power Grid. Now, mind you, this was last year. This was before we had a couple new renewable energy projects come online. In any case, it doesn't really matter because we've got the same amount of gas and coal on our grid almost every single day. The only thing that really varies is the wind and the hydro. But when you compare my vehicle, the Tesla Model 3, to a Honda Civic, which is arguably another very efficient car, my vehicle actually has 64% less carbon emissions than the Honda Civic. And this is a coal-powered car. A coal-powered car is 64% less emissions than the gasoline-powered car. So clearly, that is BS, right? Clearly, this is much more efficient, much better for lots and lots of reasons. Also, cost of ownership. So this is also outdated. I should really work on my slides. So this one, fuel was $1.36 a liter, okay? And even when it was $1.36 a liter, the annual fuel costs was about $400 for the Tesla Model 3 versus the Honda Civic being at almost $1,500. That was when fuel was $1.36. So you can imagine what that would be. It would be well over $2,000 annually for that Honda Civic, right? So a big, big difference in also the cost of ownership of the Civic versus the Tesla. But this goes for any EV versus internal combustion engine. Quite often you'll see about 70 to 80% lower costs of fuel driving the electric. Also, there's a lot of A lot of misinformation about batteries, thinking that the batteries go directly to a landfill the second that the car is done, right, and it stops running, the electric. But EV batteries can actually be used for a lot of different things, even after they've been taken out of the car. So they can be used for grid storage for several years after they've been used in their useful capacity in the electric vehicle. And then also they can be recycled after the fact, because the minerals that are used in these EV battery packs are actually very valuable. And they're worth thousands and thousands of dollars. So I'm not sure why somebody would take a piece of hardware equipment to the landfill that's worth thousands and thousands of dollars just because, right? If you want to get your core charged back on your 12 volts lead acid battery in your gas car, not many people will just throw that out the window. Usually, I know we're in Saskatchewan, people do stuff like that. But a lot of people will take it back and then recycle it to get the discount on the next one. And that's where the industry will probably end up going, where you'll get money back for your battery pack and stuff like that in the future. But the truth is, the batteries basically outlast the cars. I'd mentioned before, there's a bunch of taxis in Western Canada, in Vancouver, Victoria, Calgary, and Edmonton, and they've got 300,000 to 400,000 on the original battery pack in those vehicles. 300,000 kilometers of driving. So that's a lot, and those vehicles are still going. Yeah, so I'll maybe just skip that. But and then the other cool thing is there's also a great secondary life for a lot of these batteries. So this is on a 20-acre parcel outside a small California town. They built a 1.5 megawatt solar farm, and they took a whole bunch of old Nissan Leaf batteries and they retrofitted them into battery energy storage. So basically all day long, these batteries get charged up by these solar panels here in the background. And then at night, when peak power hits in California, which is extremely expensive, the grid operator transitions the grid to the batteries as the sun starts to go down, and those batteries can keep the grid up and running for, in some circumstances, up to 4 hours. And so what they do is they go through that really awkward transition where everybody gets home at the end of the day, starts cooking, having showers, plugging in their EVs, whatever. And it bridges that gap for those people, and it provides enough power to the grid so that the lights don't go up because of the solar being exhausted, right? So there's a lot of great applications for energy storage with these batteries, and basically the whole backbone of the modern electricity grid is all moving towards renewables and batteries because of modularity. They can be built so much faster and cheaper, and essentially just the time frame of it. So once again, the recyclability thing is critical. Batteries of any kind now can basically be recycled at a variety of places across North America. And also the great thing is that if you recycle a battery, you no longer have to mine for those battery minerals. So as soon as those get into the battery economy or the loop of minerals, those can be reused over and over and over. And they estimate most of the time you can recover about 95% of the battery minerals from an EV battery or any kind of personal electronics. The other cool thing too with this whole electrification bit is it actually uses significantly less raw materials than internal combustion vehicles. So there's been a bunch of studies done on this that has proven that the fossil fuel industry actually uses 4 times more raw materials than the electric vehicle industry as well as renewables. And the good news for us here in Canada is that we're basically right on the cusp of developing a lot of these raw materials in mines and minerals and things that will basically give us a great forward-looking opportunity here in Canada. So here's some of those studies here again that show you basically the mining quantities needed for these minerals. So when we look at currently fossil fuels at about 15,000 megatons between coal, oil, and natural gas. So that's a lot, 15,000 megatons. The clean energy that we use for minerals today for current consumption is about 7 megatons. And then in 2040, we're going to be at about 28 megatons. So there's a huge, huge difference in the amount of minerals and mining that's required. in order to bridge the gap and get to that next level of electrification here. And like this is already happening all over the place. Also, this is kind of a cool chart as well. It shows the average consumption of an average gasoline car. So over its lifetime, it will burn 17,000 liters. And is that of oil? Yeah. Versus basically this small, was it 0.38 by 0.38 meter bit of basically battery minerals. So you can see there's a lot of things that are consumed with the gasoline car versus the minerals that are inside of here, right? And which of all can be recycled. And regarding battery minerals, like you alluded to, Canada is the only country in the Western Hemisphere that has all the critical minerals required to manufacture EV batteries. And the upcoming electric economy is expected to create at least 500,000 jobs across Canada. And in the last 2 to 3 years, there's been over $5 billion worth of investments in the Canadian auto sector for manufacturing EVs in developing factories. And what's interesting is some things have changed with some of this. I'm sure some of us have heard stuff on the news where this factory was canceled or that factory was canceled, and it was true. And unfortunately, some of that has to do with the guys that live to the south of us, which we won't get into. But a lot of these kind of failed investments have actually spun out to turn into other opportunities, such as battery energy storage. So for example, Ford decided to cancel one of their big battery factories that they're using to do the Ford F-150 Lightning. Some of you guys might have heard of that truck. Unfortunately, it was canceled by Ford. Well, Ford has since pivoted, and they're using all of those same battery minerals now to do battery energy storage for renewables. And so you're going to see all of those investments now kind of fan out across North America, and those batteries are just going to end up all over the place. And like I mentioned before, it's battery energy storage coming on the grid that's going to really, really change things going forward for the power grid in general. My man, Maury Povich. So, there's not enough EV infrastructure for me to buy an electric vehicle yet. Maury has determined, research has determined that is a lie. You are not the father. So, we've been lucky the last 5 years here in Western Canada, or last 6 years. At one point, we basically had no DC fast chargers in Canada whatsoever. And then all of a sudden, the investments started to pile up. And every single one of these orange dots that you see here on the map is a DC fast charger capable of charging at least 50 kilowatts of power for an electric vehicle. Depending on the vehicle, that could be up to an hour of charging, potentially. However, some of these chargers are much, much faster than that, especially if they're in the Tesla supercharger network. Those chargers are more like a 20-minute charge. So the name of the game now is super fast charging, long distance travel, and the majority of all the cars that you see here in the room today are all capable of doing those long distance road trips without taking several additional hours of time in order to get to your destination. For example, most people can get to Calgary in one of the modern EVs with maybe an only extra 30 to 45 minutes of additional charging. Personally, I schedule all of my trips around coffee and lunch. And yeah, so here we go. So this was a trip that I had planned, leaving from Wheaton Kia in, let's say, the new Wheaton Kia EV4 that's over there that you can get for under $40,000. So I left Wheaton Kia with 90% charge. I then went all the way to, what is that, Swift? I don't even know why I'm sure. Yeah, Swift. And I'll grab a coffee in Swift. Charge there for 15 to 20 minutes. I'll continue on my trip. I will go to Medicine Hat. This is my lunch stop. So as I'm eating my lunch, my car is charging, and that's the way they have these chargers now. They always put chargers close to amenities where people want to hang out. Okay, so I'll probably be eating my Subway at the Medicine Hat supercharger, and then from there, I've got more than enough range unless I encounter some windy conditions, some weather. In that case, there's another charger just a little ways up the road, but typically my whole trip would basically be 8 to 8.5 hours. Once again, depends on weather, depends on a bunch of other factors. But I find at the end of my trip, I'm a lot more comfortable after taking a couple stops than I am just burning straight through and kind of feeling like crap at the end of the day. Everybody's version of a road trip is different, mind you, but this is kind of what a typical road trip might look like in an electric vehicle that's able to charge relatively quickly. So that's kind of what it looks like. And this is an app called a Better Route Planner that takes in all kinds of different information based on your car, how fast you like to drive, the weather conditions at that point in time, and so on and so forth. And so it makes things, it kind of just diminishes the range anxiety a little bit, especially for people who have never done long distance road trips before. It gives you a very attainable, very easy plan to follow in 95% of circumstances. And so, yeah, this brings us to, the availability of EV public charging stations, which are constantly being built out and developed across North America. And then it also brings up what some people think is the future of transportation. Some people think that it is hydrogen. So in total, we've got 72,000 stations. This is as of last year, I believe, in North America for electric vehicles. Hydrogen, we only have 5 stations in all of Canada. And in United States, I believe that's 68, if that's where I'm reading that properly. So hydrogen has not been built out the way that it was once promised and has not taken off the way that it was promised. Electric transport is clearly starting to dominate the conversation now. Mind you, there are applications for hydrogen and stuff in the future. We're not saying it's a dead technology by any stretch of the fact, but as far as personal transport, electrification is the way to go. And so when we start to look at the efficiency, then some people might argue, well, that hydrogen car might be more efficient, or maybe it drives further, or whatever the case may be. But as far as like energy inputs in order to get to your destination, or the amount of driving range you get based on the amount of energy that you entered into that vehicle, there's a great big difference. So when you look at, let's say, a Tesla Model 3, you put 100 kilowatt hours of power into it. After line losses, you get 95 kilowatt hours. After charging, you end up with 85 kilowatt hours of battery charge. And out of that, you can travel 459 kilometers. When you look at a Toyota hydrogen or a BMW hydrogen, look at the amount of energy you're putting in, and then look at how much driving range you're getting out. So what is the most efficient way of transport here? Right? I think it's pretty obvious. The electric drivetrain is so much more efficient than hydrogen. And then also too, look at all the stuff you got to do in between, right? So anyway, I don't want to hate on hydrogen too bad. It's a lot more complicated. So versus an EV, capture the power, basically put it directly in the car, right? Hydrogen, capture it, store it, separate it, distribute it, store again, right? Hydrogen power is great for fossil fuel interests because they still control the fuel, right? An EV or electric is much more democratic because we can kind of do whatever we want. We can generate the power ourselves and do whatever we want, right? Electricity is everywhere. Last time I checked, there's no hydrogen fueling station out in the parking lot. Anyway, so despite what a lot of people have heard or read online, there's been nothing but doom and gloom and all these negative forecasts for electric vehicles over the last 6 months to a year. Basically, since the administration changed down in the States, there's been nothing but bad news stories and all kinds of stuff like that. Okay, the truth is that 1 in 5 vehicles worldwide is electric. And as of a couple weeks ago, it's now 1 in 4 vehicles are electric. And those markets are all switching over. Like China, parts of Asia, a lot of Europe, they're starting to encroach upon a 50% market saturation of electric-only vehicles. That's not hybrids, that's not plug-in hybrids, that's like full battery electric cars, and they're doing just fine. So the growth is increasing. Obviously in Canada, we're a bit of a laggard here, but things are improving, things are getting better, and what is helping grow the industry? I've mentioned it already a million times today, $2 a liter for fuel. Economics trumps everything. It really does. $1.78 or $1.80, whatever it is today, that is the reason why so many people are buying cars. It wasn't that long ago, last year, a lot of these dealers were talking about shipping their cars out of Saskatchewan because nobody was buying them. There just wasn't enough demand. Okay, now they're asking for those cars back because they've got people knocking on their door saying, I need that, right? I'm tired of getting ripped off at the pump because of some stupid war in the Middle East that I have no control over. So you can control an EV, right? You can at least have some regular sort of fuel supply. And so because of some incentives and obviously $2 a liter fuel, we've noticed a big increase in our percentage of new vehicle registrations here in Canada. And yeah.
This is the end of 2025. It's not even long.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So this was actually before the war even started in the Middle East. So that's a great point. So this is going to be way up here again somewhere, I'm guessing. We might even hit maybe 20%. Which is 1 in 5 of all new cars being electrified. So yeah, things are changing and we're going back up again just because basically people are just tired of it, right? Anyways, hopefully I didn't shame too many industries too badly. Is there any questions that people have about the industry or battery minerals or power grid stuff, charging, anything like that?
I'd like to thank you for justifying why there was a carbon tax.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Exactly.
Can you go back to the other
As
slide?
it's going up, as gas prices, gas is going up. One for electric vehicles. And
That's
that
right.
is the whole point of the carbon tax.
That's right. Yeah.
How ironic.
I know, right? Yeah.
Can you switch back to the other slide? Yeah, leave that one up for a minute.
Yeah.
That illustrates it pretty well, right? And now what's kind of cool too, we've been talking about it off and on all day, but we still have the clean fuel standard in Canada, which is a little bit different than the maybe the consumer-facing carbon tax that we might have seen on gas pumps and stuff. But we're actually getting credit now for EV chargers, even in our houses. So a level 2 EV charger, depending on the brand that you go with, you're going to get 10-cent rebate per kilowatt hour via check sent to your house. So you're basically reclaiming half of your charging costs back just because the government is really trying to stimulate more of a clean energy economy, I guess, right? Which makes sense. And then the other thing I didn't even mention too is healthcare with the vehicles and how much benefit there is to healthcare. There's been studies that have done in Toronto where they said for every EV that's on the road, it's a $10,000 benefit to your local healthcare system, preventing all kinds of, long ongoing diseases, cancers, respiratory disorders, things like that, right? And that's been essentially steamrolled by the oil industry where they don't talk about that stuff. They don't want to talk about how vehicle emissions are bad or carbon monoxide and those kinds of things, right? So, is there any other questions? Stories? Does anybody want to tell a story?
How many people have died from carbon monoxide poisoning from EVs?
Yeah, that's a great point.
The statement was, how many people have died from carbon monoxide poisoning from an electric vehicle? I'm going to guess it was 0. Right? Yeah. Any other stories, questions? One other thing I'll mention is that the used market for EVs has gotten pretty strong. The last while, we're just kind of starting to hit that sweet spot where we're getting a lot of vehicles that are coming back from lease, and those are kind of hitting the free market. And it's kind of crazy. It's like 6 months or 8 months ago, there's a lot of people that were like, those EVs are garbage, nobody wants them, blah, blah, blah. And so what happened with the used EV market is it fell off a cliff, and so many cars were going for so cheap. Like you could find a Nissan Leaf for like $4,000 or $5,000. My Tesla Model 3, for a while there, I doubt I could have even sold it for $15,000. 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, that was like a $70,000 or $80,000 car, and now it's for 20. Now there's some other things that play with that, but the used market is getting to be so strong, and I'm curious to see what will happen with used prices going forward. If the $2 a liter fuel will increase those used prices again, and they'll skyrocket because everybody wants one, and there's fairly low supply and high demand, right? But we will see. Question.
So, gas vehicle versus electric vehicle. Gas vehicles, you know, you start being worried about it, it's got 100,000 kilometers on it, like that, all that if you can, but I mean, they're sending that up to whatever, too. Where time-wise, to say gas is going to affect the gas time, where is it going to be going?
For like maximum years of use and driving in kilometers and stuff. Yeah.
So it depends on user circumstance a bit, but I've seen it. I might have mentioned it maybe in the previous presentation. These vehicles are very popular with taxi fleets now. Remember, like basically any of the hybrid. I gotta move over here. Didn't reverb. The Toyota hybrids, especially the what was the first one? The Prius, right? When it came out 25 years ago, what was the number one taxi vehicle anywhere in the world when that vehicle came out? It was the Toyota Prius, right? And then it ventured out and it became the Camry, which is also a very popular electrified vehicle. Now it's the RAV4 that's going in that direction now. Now we're switching from those hybrid powertrains to full battery electric powertrains, and a lot of those same people that are driving basically transportation as a service, you know, a taxi, they're starting to jump over to these types of drivetrains. And from what we're seeing, like 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 kilometers on the original battery and motor with some of those cars.